Marriage equality does not exist in the United States of America. Gay marriage was legalized nationwide in the States on June 26, 2015. A huge step forward in human rights and equality. However, the fight for equality is far from over. There are still people in the United States today who do not have the rights to an equal marriage. Disabled people have never had the rights to an equal marriage. This may sound like insanity. How on earth, in the big year 2026, can America prevent a whole minority from getting married? It gets a little bit murky. There's no outright law that disabled people can't get married. However, their marriage status controls their right to disability benefits, and their lives are tied to their disability benefits. Disabled people cannot live without health care and the money disability provides. It's very expensive to be disabled. Most of their money goes to medical equipment, co-pays, and medication. If disabled people don't have access to medical care, simply put, they will die. They have to choose between love or life, even though love is an integral part of life. There is a great documentary made in 2024 called Patrice, the movie. It explains in detail the system for disabled people's eyes with disability lawyers. I highly recommend you watch it. They are very direct in this movie about the truth that if you get married and you are collecting Social Security benefits through Supplemental Security Income, also known as SSI, your benefits will be cut, period. And so will your Medicaid benefits, which is health insurance. It's hard to comprehend your benefits can disappear just like that, when it's so hard to get them in the first place. There's a common misconception that there are many people on disability that don't need it and are stealing benefits and such. My dad even felt this way for a long time until he witnessed me get denied 2 times while I was actively hospitalized. According to the Social Security Administration fiscal year 2024 data, at the initial application stage, 62% of all applications were denied. This means for every 10 people, 6 are denied. The stats are true regardless of legitimacy of person's disability. The odds get even lower after filing your first appeal. 84% of cases will be denied. This is not because the individual is not disabled. It is because the paperwork and documentation essentially needs to be perfect, which is extremely difficult when you are disabled because you need to see so many specialist doctors, each at a different location, and each individual needs a separate signed form of consent. A lot of disabled individuals will reach out to a lawyer for help. Since the disabled individual won't have any money since they can't work and are not yet on disability, the lawyer will take them on for free. Then once the individual is approved, the lawyer will take half the back pay the defendant is owed. The amount of back pay is determined either by date of onset disability or when you first applied for disability. I personally was approved my 3rd time without any help from a lawyer, though I had to go to the disability office and get assessed by a psychiatrist and a physician. When the physician checked my joint hypermobility, they dislocated my shoulder. So yeah, it was pretty obvious I have a disability. There is actually a computer at the first stage of applications that enters all your symptoms, and if it finds one singular job you can do, no matter your location, it will deny you. My one singular job that I found I could do was states away. Mind you, I can't drive, but it was a string detangler in a factory. I have no kind of idea what kind of job like that actually entails, but I'd probably dislocate my finger. I don't know. My point in this story was to show you how incredibly hard it is to get on Social Security disability income. After being questioned like you are assumed criminal to get on disability, you can't get married. It's not even just legally getting married. You cannot even live together. The cost of your care would be put entirely on your partner's shoulders. To stay on disability, you cannot save money. You cannot have over $2,000 in your savings or assets. This eliminates you from owning a house because a house counts as assets because it holds monetary value and can be sold. This saving cap limits renting an apartment due to the average cost of rent in the United States being $1,740, not including the average required 1 month's rent down payment and security deposit. Most disabled people live in public housing based on your income, or are homeless. Based on these strict restrictions, it makes sense that half of homeless individuals live with an intellectual disability or physical disability, and why disabled people experience homelessness at a rate that is 2.5 times higher than overall population of the United States. It feels like the world thinks you don't deserve love if you're disabled. The world treats you like you're a different species with no feelings, like we're worthless. Yet we contribute to society more than they know. Frida Kahlo, one of the most well-known artists and has works around the world in hundreds of museums. She was disabled with spina bifida, polio, and injuries from a bus accident confined to her bed. She continued to make art because she's an artist and that's what you do, and she's still world-renowned decades after her death. Judith Heumann, also known as the mother of disability rights. Heumann had polio as a child, left her with a permanent disability. She was one of the most well-known disability activists. She's part of why disabled children can go to school today and be just as knowledgeable as their non-disabled peers. She organized sit-in protests of Capitol buildings that lasted days and made sure that the disabled people there got what they needed. She helped craft the Americans with Disability Act, known as the ADA, that prohibits people from discriminations against disabled people, allows disabled people to request reasonable accommodations, mandates public buildings must be accessible, and many more amazing things. She helped 504, one of the reasons I actually graduated school. The 504 is an act for accommodations in school. Andrea Bocelli, a famed Italian musician and musical producer who has sold millions of records globally. He was born partially blind and later became fully blind due to an accident. We literally had a disabled American president. Franklin D. Roosevelt. He could not walk unsupported due to polio, though we mainly hid it from the public eye fearing judgment, as, that's what this whole video is about. He served 3 terms and pulled the country out from a depression through social programs. This penalty exists in the first place because when Social Security was invented, every disabled person was in an institution. There were laws known as ugly laws, meaning anyone with a visible disability may not leave their house. Most did not own a home, so they were thrown in institutions. It was assumed disabled people would never get married, never work a job, or never own a home. They had no rights. Social Security was built from a faulty system, so it's mostly faulty now, just like the system it was built from. The penalty comes from a place assuming disabled people would forever be isolated from the public, and it never went away. A bill to remove marriage penalty gets renewed every couple years, then sits in Congress for a couple years, then expires, and the process restarts. Politicians say it would cost too much money to change the penalty. At first, it doesn't make sense. How would it cost money when these people were already on disability in the first place, even when it's so difficult to get on? The simple answer is it does save them money because the majority of people who aren't aware of the penalty, so they get married, lose their benefits, and most likely die. Disabled people dying does save them money. However, if the person on disability loses their benefits, does not die, but becomes institutionalized instead, the state has to pay for it since the individual would have no insurance, which would cost the government exponentially more money. In 2025, the average annual payment a person on disability makes is $18,444 a year, according to the Social Security Administration. This is impossible to live on, which is why most disabled people live in Section 8 housing, which is public housing based on your income. It helps low-income families elderly, veterans, and disabled individuals. I couldn't find an exact yearly cost of a stay in an institution because it varies depending on a person's diagnosis, locations, and medications needed. The closest I could find was the average cost of a 30-day inpatient program, which ranges from $15,000 to $60,000. That is just for one singular month, which is more than a disabled person makes in a year. As you can see, from these costs, it is more expensive for the government to put disabled people in an institution than it is for them to provide disabled people with benefits. It doesn't make sense as a plan, but that's because it's not their plan. Their plan is for the system to fail disabled people and for them to fall through the cracks because we are afterthoughts or thought of just as lazy among the rest of the population, so they don't care what happens in the first place, even though we are humans just like them, with feelings, with passion and love. Some people get married on disability anyway. Despite knowing or not knowing, they will lose access to their health care. Either way, they fully trust their partner to help them with their health, money, even though it's pretty impossible to live in a house or apartment on a one-income household nowadays. Anyway, one person being in control of everything can lead to a pretty big power balance. If only one partner holds all the access to the money and the access to healthcare, and can put disabled people in a very dangerous situation with no way for escape. A review by Public Health England in 2015 confirmed that people with disabilities are more likely to experience domestic abuse for longer periods of time and experience more severe and frequent abuse than able-bodied people. In 2016, the Office of National Statistics published a report on intimate personal violence and partner. It found that 16% of women with a long-term illness or disability experienced domestic abuse compared to 6.8% of able-bodied women. 8% of men with a long-term illness or disability experienced domestic abuse compared to 3.2% of able-bodied men. Victims with a disability were more likely to experience other effects as a result of their abuse, including mental health or emotional problems, difficulty in other relationships, and attempted suicide. If the loss of benefits doesn't kill the person with a disability, their relationship might. This forced power imbalance would put a strain on anyone's relationship. The disabled person not having control over their own medical care, and the person they married having to get used to the dynamic you can't understand until you're living it. Abuse doesn't have to just be hitting. It can be withholding medical care, destroying medical equipment, withholding access to communication, withholding medication, withholding transportation, withholding meals, emotionally berating you, threats, controlling you financially, and many more. All these methods of abuse are very easy in this situation due to a disabled person's partner having control over all their medical insurance and care and finances. It's extremely hard to escape an abusive relationship even when you are able-bodied. The stigma that comes with being disabled makes escaping 10 times harder. Police are less likely to respond to reported violence against victims with disability. One study found that police respond up to 90% of reports of victims without a disability, but only 77% of reports of a victim with a disability. There are many organizations doing great work to house and hide individuals from their abusers, like domestic abuse safe houses. However, these domestic violence shelters aren't very helpful when you're disabled. This is not to diminish the work shelters do. So many people would not be alive if these shelters did not exist. I want these shelters to continue to exist and help even more people in the process. There are disabled individuals everywhere who don't reach out for help due to the inaccessibility of it all. There is a quote from a woman named Kimberly Black Wiseman, who is a quadriplegic, that really points out the flaws in the system. She stayed in a violent relationship that nearly resulted in her death. Here is her quote. Looking back on my experiences of abuse during the battering relationship in 1990, I did not perceive a shelter as an option because of my need for physical accessibility and attendant care. Back in 1990, basic community services, even restaurants, were generally not accessible to me because that was just after the passage of the Americans with Disability Act. During the battering relationship, if I had information on safety planning, education, and domestic violence, and I had an accessible shelter available, I would have been able to protect myself, to get out of the relationship before I was severely beaten, and before the hospital and the police had to become involved to get me out. This statement, made about an event that happened in 1990, still happens today. Disabled individuals still have to rely solely on their partners for access to care due to the marriage penalty, revoking their access to disability benefits. Disabled individuals can't rely on domestic violence shelter like able-bodied individuals. Examples of barriers to shelters are lack of contact, like hard of hearing individuals can't use the hotline, brochures not clearly stating if they are accessible, not having ASL interpreters, not having visual alarms, brochures unavailable in Braille. Some shelters require individuals to do chores which could be inaccessible to disabled individuals, and some old shelters that existed before ADA are not wheelchair accessible. The ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA was passed in 1990 and took effect in 1992. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in almost all aspects of the individual's life. The ADA covers for-profit businesses and nonprofit businesses. State and government programs are covered by the ADA as well, which can include some domestic shelters. However, places of public accommodations, like privately owned domestic violence shelters, have different standards. There are unfortunately expectations because the buildings could have existed before ADA or be a historic landmark. This is obviously not an urgent matter for the U.S. government, as I said before. Their plan is for disabled people to never get married due to the marriage penalty. If the lack of access doesn't take their life, the power imbalance may, which in a way does save the government money. The U.S. isn't the only government to think about and treat disabled citizens this way. Canada does it in a far much quicker way. In Canada exists a program called MAID, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. In the USA, there's a similar thing called Death with Dignity. However, in the US, you need to be terminally ill to receive Death with Dignity. In Canada, things are far less restricted. MAID was first legalized in 2016 in Canada, strictly for those who are going to die in the foreseeable future. Now, according to the BBC, MAID is responsible for 1 out of every 20 deaths in Canada. In 2021, Canada expanded access to MAID to include people who want to end their lives because of a chronic condition. Canada's wait time to see a doctor can be notoriously long. According to a study done by the Fraser Institute, it takes a median wait of 30 weeks between a referral from a general practitioner to receive treatment. This is leading to assisted dying being recommended by doctors in cases it shouldn't be. The BBC shares several examples of this. One woman in her 50s with a history of depression and suicidal thoughts was granted euthanasia due to failing to secure housing that met her medical needs. Another case was a patient in Nova Scotia who had cancer and was asked twice if she was aware of MAID as an option, as she underwent mastectomy surgeries. These are by far not the only cases. Canada news outlets frequently report cases where people with disabilities consider MAID due to lack of housing, health care, and disability benefits. Disabled people deserve the right to live with their loved ones. They deserve the right to live, period. Disabled people don't deserve doctors recommending death over treatment simply because it's easier and more cost-effective. Disabled people are human with humans' emotions. There is a quote from the documentary I previously talked about I want to show you all because I think Patrice puts it in much better words than I ever could.
Beloveds, we are all gathered here today to create radical change.
We must make it clear to our legislators and society that our love matters. It is a fundamental human right that should never be denied.
Who wants to get married? Come on up. Repeat after me. We would like to get married.
We would like to get married.
And be able to go to the doctor.
And be able to go to the doctor.
We would like to get married.
We would like to get married.
And be able to buy groceries and medicine.
And be able to buy groceries and medicine.
We would like to get married.
We would like to get married.
And be able to pay rent and bills.
And be able to pay rent and bills.
And not end up living in a cardboard box.
In a cardboard box.
By the powers invested in me, I pronounce you all together.
Got to have our commitment ceremony. And it was beautiful. But we still can't get married.
This clip is from the documentary Patrice about her journey trying to get married to the love of her life. Together they host a symbolic mass commitment ceremony with other disabled couples who also can't get married. They did this in 2024 on the front lawn of the U.S. Capitol to urge lawmakers to overturn the penalty. The symbolic commitment may have been beautiful, but it's 2026 now, and disabled people still can't marry without risking death. Disabled people still can't live together with their loved ones, and are still treated as less than the rest of the population. The fight will not be over until we are all equal, and there is a space for us, not just in our small fellow disabled communities, but everywhere. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to this and learning more about disability rights. We definitely need to talk about this more, and I hope you tell some people you know, just to get the word out there. And I've left some sources down below of where I got this information from. And I definitely recommend watching Patrice the movie. It's a great documentary and it's really helpful for understanding. Thank you. Stay weird. Bye.